Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve. Happy Saturday to you. I am recording this early afternoon Friday. There's still going to be potential news that will come out through the rest of today, and there will be 6 games, I believe, played tonight, of which at least 5 of them I'll let probably finish before doing another session of recording tonight and editing that into the rest of this video. But in this video, I will cover mostly injuries, training camp news, anything that might have an impact on my rankings, maybe any kind of fun tidbits, things that might have been trending on like NFL's Reddit subreddit thing, as well as 1 or 2 quick things from each game, if there's that many things to cover. For the most part, I won't be talking about contract things, defensive injuries, those kinds of things, mostly fantasy relevant kind of news. Now let's get to the non-injury related news items over the last week. Starting off from last Saturday is where my cutoff for this was. Kareem Hunt has 2 bits of news here. He visited on Monday New Orleans, left without a contract. Visited Indianapolis Tuesday or Wednesday, left without a contract. So nothing came of that. As far as Detroit goes, they brought in quarterback Teddy Bridgewater. To me, this would just give me a little bit of more comfort when coming to any kind of draft decision for a Detroit, especially at wide receiver, tight end. If there's a tiebreaker to be made, thinking about the backup quarterbacks, never a terrible way to go if you're absolutely lost on the tie. A little bit of news from Tampa Bay. Chase Edmonds, running back, is to get third down work is a quote. High praise from the offensive coordinator there as of late. And this doesn't change anything for me because I have been projecting Chase Edmonds like this for absolute months now since my first projection. As far as any impacts on Rachaad White, he projects as my running back 17. Chase Edmonds projects as my running back 46. I have them both ranked lower than those projection numbers, but the main point is that Rachaad White, at his current ADP, still has plenty of meat left on the bone, so not concerned about that. Even if Chase Edmonds were to take more work than I'm expecting from him, once again, still some meat left on the bone. In the event that we want to take this as absolute fact kinds of news, like he is going to be the receiving down back, the third down back, I did change up my projections a little bit just to see what that might look like. Chase Edmonds came out of that looking essentially like a poor man's Antonio Gibson to Antonio Gibson-esque, depending on exactly how you feel about each of those teams' offenses. I did end up moving him up in my rankings a little bit because he has slid backwards since my original rankings, moved him up from running back 76 to running back 69. Nothing huge as far as Rachaad White goes. In the projections, he projected almost exactly where his current ADP is of running back 28. So that just backed up my idea that for where you're getting Rachaad White at right now, this news doesn't change anything on him. Then some more news from Tampa Bay. It is being reported that Baker Mayfield will start week 1. Last week there was some rumblings about, and there still are, about Kyle Trask outperforming Baker Mayfield. Apparently, they've made a decision already that Baker Mayfield will be starting week 1. It makes enough sense. It's easier to start Baker Mayfield and then replace him with Kyle Trask than going the other way around. San Francisco, Brock Purdy listed as the starter. Preseason, teams had to make depth charts, so you cannot really take these types of things as fact. But in this instance, Brock Purdy being listed at the starter, I don't think that's nothing. It's something enough. And then as far as Atlanta goes, their depth chart made some waves. Bijan Robinson was listed as the 3rd running back on their depth chart. Cordell Patterson, number 1. Tyler Algier, the RB2. This is nothing. This is noise. This is just a preseason depth chart. Don't worry about it. Baltimore, Harbaugh says that he expects to see J.K. Dobbins back soon. The ball is in his court. I think we have more J.K. Dobbins. Another news tidbit came out today. There has been some discussion about a long-term deal for J.K. Dobbins via Ian Rappaport. It sounds like things are not being totally ignored. Things are happening behind the scenes, whatever they may be. I do think at the right price, it would make sense to, you want to get J.K. Dobbins on board. I think you want that team feels like they could compete, and J.K. Dobbins is a part of that plan. but it has to be at the right price, and the team knows that. So I don't know. It might just be a thing for J.K. Dobbins. Getting some extra security would make him feel comfortable, even if it's not some sort of huge payday. Get him a 2-year deal. I don't know. It's an interesting decision and discussion there onto how much sense that makes to go with a long-term deal for J.K. Dobbins, who's been consistently injured. Dallas, Mike McCarthy thinks that Tony Pollard is all the way back from his injury that he suffered in San Francisco, so that's good news. Then last week, Saturday, Rashid Shaheed and Traquan Smith, wide receivers from New Orleans, left practice early with groin injuries. Haven't heard too much about that over the week. Miles Sanders, Carolina, tweaked something. It sounds like it was really nothing, I think. He's not playing in the preseason game this week, and that makes enough sense. Then Eno Benjamin, New Orleans, ruptured Achilles. He's out for the season. Devon Achane, the Miami Dolphins, was day-to-day with an undisclosed injury. Let me check if he's back at practice. So I'm going to guess that he's already back at practice, because when I look up the news on Devon Achane, basically Dolphins, Jalen Waddle, staff, everybody raving about rookie running back Devon Achane, just like I've told you to expect good things from him. A little report here that they think that he could be a 3-down back. I agree. Compare him to Chris Johnson. Yeah, I agree. This is why I liked him a lot. So all good news coming out of camp. Doesn't really change any of my opinions on him, but looks like that injury was a nothing burger. And then moving on to Monday, Luke Schoonmaker or Schoonmaker. I always thought it was Schoonmaker because I've had friends with similar last names, and that would have been a sh sound. I've heard it's Schoonmaker, so if that is incorrect, please recorrect me so I can say Schoonmaker. For the rest of his career, was activated off the non-football injury list as he heals. That is Dallas tight end, by the way, if I didn't say, from a minor plantar fascia injury, which must not be ruptured or torn, because otherwise I think this would be a much bigger deal. But this is the type of injury that if you're a Luke Schoonmaker truther, if you've been taking him late in drafts, I would probably just cool off of that and find a different target that you could get hyped about. Then for Houston, we had a big injury. Titus Howard, offensive tackle, broke his hand. He had surgery for that injury on Monday. 4 to 6 weeks is the expected time for recovery, which means that he could be back as early as week 1 or as late as week 3, assuming everything goes to plan. Green Bay Packers' Rashawn Gary returned off of the PUP list, so if you like their defense, it looks like things are basically on schedule with his recovery. Cleveland Browns' Jerome Ford left practice with a hamstring injury. It is considered to be week to week via Stefanski. And for me, looking at the other names on the depth chart for the running back that they have, the running back room in Cleveland, it's hard to get on board with any other names. And being a backup, they are going to be able to be patient with him and allow Jerome Ford he just has more freedom in order to fully recover, I believe, especially this time of the year. So by the time that he might be fantasy relevant, assuming there is no big injury to Nick Chubb, week 1, I think he is fine. I didn't change my rankings on him at all. And a little news out of Indianapolis, Jonathan Taylor receives treatment on his ankle, preventing him from practicing. So his absence from practicing this past week, or for as long as it was throughout the week, was not due to the previous news of the scuffle going on between him and the organization. Then on Tuesday, one item, Marlon Mack unfortunately tore his Achilles. He'll be out of the year. He was with Arizona Cardinals. On Wednesday, out of Miami, Jalen Waddle went down at practice. He was escorted back to the locker room. Appeared to be caused from landing on top of the ball. Maybe in his rib section was where the speculation was. Somewhere in there might have been the injury. And not much has really come out of the injury since then. So keep an eye on that news. Make sure it's nothing major. Hopefully not. Carolina, Miles Sanders tweaked his groin. I knew there was more news about Miles Sanders. So he tweaked something again. Hopefully all will be fine there. They're going to let him rest, I'm sure, with that going on. Then for the Baltimore Ravens, another bit of news here. Rashad Bateman was acted off the PUP list. I guess this is non-injury. This is kind of injury related. So he was activated off the PUP list. I moved him back up in my rankings. I had him down to wide receiver 43, just concerned about what's going on again. But at this point in the offseason, there's still about a month before he'll be playing games. I figure that's enough time to be coming back and being at full health for the regular season. So it gets me a little bit more excited about him again. If I didn't say, moved him up from 43 to wide receiver 38 with room to move him up a little bit further yet. He was, I believe, higher than that earlier on in the offseason. Then on Thursday, another big name here, San Francisco tight end George Kittle had an adductor injury. That is a muscle injury near the hip, thigh, groin. It's probably looking at a 2-week recovery. I think the team said something about 1 week. I believe that would be 1 week before he can kind of just start to... 1 week before he can start to do things and get to full health within 2 weeks would be the hope. But it is a very, very touchy injury. So yes, I would be slightly concerned about drafting Kittle right now. Slightly. All I didn't move him back in my tight end rankings, but I moved him back in my overall rankings so that he's more in line with TJ Hawkinson, Kyle Pitts, very close to them in my overall rankings now. Last bit of news from Thursday, New York Giants. Garrett Wilson returned to practice after his injury last week, so that was good to see. And today on Friday so far, one big name, minor injury, luckily so far, according to a source. Devontae Adams was favoring his right leg after getting hit. Now, looking at last night's preseason games, or 2 nights ago, New England versus Houston, really had one takeaway from that. It's the obvious one. Tank Dell had one heck of a drive, one heck of a good starting game overall, but mostly because of that one drive. Moved him up to my wide receiver 92 from wide receiver 96. Obviously, there is more room for him to go up, but I want to see it a little bit more. I'm not just going to throw all of my thoughts about where he fits into the offense this season away based on one good game, but it was impressive. He made a really good catch, and so he also moved up to a new tier with that. Just to keep in mind, don't get overly hyped on these things. Are you also getting absolutely hyped about Jalen Reagor from Minnesota, who had a good game, solid game, similar enough to Tank Dell, I believe, without the touchdown? It's preseason, folks. Don't get overly jacked about these things. But let's still get a little excited about these things. So moving on to the Minnesota versus Seattle game. My takeaways come from Seattle in this one. And what it was basically all the rookie talent, the second-tier guys that they got last year, have showed up in preseason game week 1. And those names are running back Bryant Koback, wide receiver Jake Bobo, wide receiver Matt Landers. For the most part, those were the big names. Matt Landers is a very exciting guy with the ball in his hands, and he showed that on a really, really cool play if you missed that one from the game. Jake Bobo had several good plays, had probably the single best game of anybody in the entire game, I would say. Running back Bryant Koback, these are all just names that you're not drafting, but if they come into... people start talking about them mid-season due to some injuries to some of the starters, I think these are the types of guys that, especially Jake Bobo, Bryant Koback, you might be able to get excited about. So we've seen Seattle have a lot of injuries to running backs before, and be on their 4th, 5th running back. Bryant Koback is a beefy dude, kind of guy who can take some names who I think would, even if Dallas, who's their receiving back, their 3rd running back, even if he's healthy, I think Bryant Koback would come in if Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker were both injured and kind of be the 1A and 1B guys there. So that would be my suspicion just based on how he did in preseason week 1 and the fact that I liked him in the draft process last season enough that I remembered who he was. And then Zach Charbonnet, Jackson Smith-Njigba, they're big-time rookies, draft picks this season. Jackson Smith was getting open, as we would expect from him. Zach Charbonnet didn't do anything overly exciting, just kind of did things. So nothing bad for either of them, nothing amazing for either of them, but Jackson Smith looked good. All right, and we are back. It's been about 9 hours. A little bit of news from Friday during the day. Kareem Hunt visited with the Vikings. Didn't hear any follow-up on that. And Joe Burrow was running sprints along the sideline today. So good news there with that being, I think it was a calf strain. So it looks like that recovery is going well. As far as the games during the day tonight, I should say, all of my rookie running backs, my guys, Devon A-Chain, Chase Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, really failed to excite in the ground game for their respective teams, but they did show up in the receiving games to differing extents. Really, out of them, Jahmyr Gibbs probably got the least opportunity, as well as had the least production because of that. Not on the ground. I think he had the best ground game out of the three and the least air yards and receptions. But that's what I like about these three guys, is they are going to give you a receiving game. But let's just go over 2 big things from each game. First game up, Green Bay versus Cincinnati. Luke Musgrave was definitely getting his targets early on from Jordan Love, so that was good to see if you're a believer in Luke Musgrave. And Jordan Love, as the story has tended to go with him, there was some good, there was some bad for him today. Overall, probably the good outweighed the bad. And then for Cincinnati, I already talked about running back Chase Brown, but wide receiver Andre Iosivas, he made good on the opportunities that he had. He had quite a few opportunities to make good on, I believe 10 targets, maybe 4 receptions, but he made those 4 receptions count, and the fact that he's getting open, getting those targets also says something. He was definitely my guy. You know, we talked about the running back, my guy's not really showing up, but a lot of wide receivers that I liked late in drafts, even some second-year guys from last year that weren't necessarily the biggest of names, had some good showings, so proud of those guys. And as far as Iosivas goes, for fantasy purposes, during the season, halfway through the season, whatever, if T. Higgins or Jamar Chase goes down, and he's a name that's potentially going to be playing, keep him in mind. He's a big play kind of guy, and he, I believe, more so than Charlie, I wanted to say Charlie Brown. Charlie Jones would be the Tyler Boyd kind of replacement. Then Pittsburgh versus Tampa Bay. Pittsburgh fans are going to be living off of a high all week. Very excited for the prospects for this upcoming season. Had a very good drive, or I think it was just the first drive with Kenny Pickett. It was almost a picture-perfect first drive. Not quite, but a very, very good drive with the starters. Then as far as Tampa Bay goes, Keyshawn Vaughn and Chase Edmonds were going every other drive. So, I talked a little bit about Chase Edmonds earlier. Just going by the numbers, each running back got 2 drives, and Chase Edmonds would have won the battle between those two. But it's obviously not clear-cut that Chase Edmonds is going to be the second man up in the running back group there. Keyshawn Vaughn is fighting for that job. Then Atlanta versus Miami. Wasn't a whole lot to take away from this game. Young-Ho Koo missed an extra point, so that's not great. And then for Devon A-Chain, already talked about him a little bit, but he ran behind Myles Gaskin. So although people are raving about him, he obviously has to work his way up that depth chart yet. And they're going to make him earn whatever role he ends up with in this offense, which I think will be a big one at some point. I think sooner than later, but they're not going to just hand it over to him. And he didn't necessarily earn it today. Then for the New York Giants versus the Detroit Lions, I don't really have anything to say about the Detroit Lions. I think they had a fair amount of targets go Jameson Williams' way. He didn't really take advantage of that. And for the New York Giants, I think that is safe to say that guys like Jamison Crowder and Cole Beasley are clearly camp bodies and veterans there to help the youth and the young wide receivers learn and progress quicker. They were playing well into the second quarter at the very least. I don't think they were out there to necessarily start, or at least both of them. So, if you were concerned about either one of them having a role in this offense, I really don't think that's the plan. Then for Washington versus Cleveland Browns, Cleveland had a good first drive for Deshaun Watson, and he still showed that he still has his legs underneath him, so that's always good. That's part of the plus for Deshaun Watson fantasy-wise. And Elijah Moore went to the locker room. X-rays did come back later on this evening, negative on any kind of rib injury, so that was good. As far as the Washington Commanders go, Brian Robinson looked good, and the tight end, Cole, I don't recall who it was, second-year guy, he was targeted heavily. The main thing is that it's the position, the tight end, that was targeted heavy. I was, at least earlier on in the offseason, pretty high up on Logan Thomas, and there's a reason for that, and that has to do with the offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, and having a young and inexperienced quarterback in there. I think that's a good combination for a tight end to potentially come out of Washington. And who would you think it would be? It would be Logan Thomas initially, but then there's all the injury concerns. I'm not saying to go ahead and draft him, but week one, if something happens exciting and you might potentially be in the market for a tight end, go ahead and get one. And then a not my guy rookie running back, Chris Rodriguez Jr., really looked good in a limited amount of carries that he got for Washington. I think that game's still going on, so I mean he might get a little bit more work yet, but yeah, he looked good from what I could tell. So that's a little bit concerning for that running back room. Maybe things won't be as clear cut. Maybe things will be split a little bit more than one would hope amongst 3 running backs instead of mostly between 2 running backs. And last up, we have the Denver versus Arizona game. Denver Broncos. Just like, what are we doing here, Denver Broncos? You are killing me, Sean Payton. And I'm not talking about their poor start. We'll get to the rough start in a moment. But Adam Troutman is, like, are we seriously going to make Adam Troutman the starting tight end? Please don't. Let it be Greg Dulcich. It should be Greg Dulcich. I think he's earned it already. So that's concerning, considering I absolutely love Greg Dulcich and have him ranked insanely high. Might need to think twice about that one now. So we'll see if maybe he has a good rest of the evening. That game is still fairly early on. I wanted to wait until the starters for Denver stopped playing, which took a while. They had a rough start. Didn't look good. It looked a lot like last season. They kind of shook that off after 3 drives, after having to go for it on a 4th down after a big drop by Jerry Jeudy. And then Jerry Jeudy came back the very next play on that 4th down play. Caught it for a touchdown. So they ended on a high note. That drive was much better than the first 2 drives, but yeah, it was a rough, scary start for Denver fans. But it's just the preseason. That's what this is for, is to shake off old cobwebs and bring in the new. That is it for the Saturday review. If I missed anything, please leave it in the comments for other people to see. Especially if guys are lighting up your local news. If you have in training camp, that's definitely the news that I see the least of, is every team's training camp and studs. If you have someone locally that you think might be able to break out throughout the year and be a stud, leave it in the comments. I can follow up on them. So, once again, thank you very much for stopping on through here. Peace out. And have a good weekend.